Do your daily actions reflect who you are, or are they designed to fit into someone else's expectations? Hey there, I'm glad to see you here again. Thank you for showing up for yourself. Last time, we looked inward, exploring your inner world and uncovering the stories that shape your sense of self. Today, we are turning our attention outward, to how you interact with the world around you. Let me ask you this. Have you ever noticed how the same task could feel easy one day and impossible the next one? Or how easily you can go from hyper-focus to completely overwhelmed in matters of minutes? If you can identify with this, you are not alone. These shifts are often not about ability, they are about context, environment, and how our behavior aligns with what truly matters to us. In this session, we will explore our actions, habits, and the patterns that either help or hinder you. The goal isn't to fix anything, it's to understand what works for you and how you can create conditions where you can thrive. Sounds good? Let's get started. We will look at behaviors by splitting them into two categories, private and public. This is a helpful way to explore how our actions and habits are shaped by both internal and external influences. Now, when it comes to ADHD plus folks like us, there is something important to keep in mind. Our behaviors are strongly impacted by hypersensitivity. This is a pretty common trait among ADHD plus people. We just feel things more intensely, whether it's emotions, sensations, or even the energy in the room. This shapes how we experience the world and in turn influences both the private and public sides of our behavior. So, what does it actually mean to be a highly sensitive person? Well, highly sensitive people have nervous systems that, in simple, register way more details, which means we are highly responsive to all sorts of inputs, like sensory, emotional, and even subtle cues in the environment. It's like having an extra layer of perception that lets us notice things like other people might miss. This can be amazing when we are moved by a piece of art or picking up on someone's feelings, but it can also be overwhelming, especially when life gets loud or chaotic. For people like us, hypersensitivity is even more dialed up because of how our brain processes information. We are wired to notice everything, sounds, emotion patterns, even things that seem visible to others like electricity. It's a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gives us incredible insight and creativity, but on the other, it can leave us feeling overstimulated or completely drained. The key is understanding this part of ourselves, so we can embrace it as a strength while learning strategies to handle the challenges that come with it. For instance, in my case, I am hypersensitive to textures, lighting, electromagnetic fields, sounds, people's emotions, and a few more things. This means that I avoid certain fabrics because they feel uncomfortable. I am constantly adjusting the lighting and contrast in my workspace, and even avoid touching my MacBook or my iPhone directly because I can feel the electricity entering my body. I also isolate myself from outdoor noise or crowded spaces to prevent migraines and avoid certain social circumstances that can be overwhelming. Yeah, I know this might sound very random and like a lot, but it's a good example of why we often keep these details to ourselves. Maybe you have never thought about these sensitivities in this way. Perhaps this perspective feels new to you, or you do know that you are hypersensitive, but you feel that people will not understand you. One key takeaway from me is that managing these high sensitivity experiences requires three main steps. First, we need to understand ourselves better, what affects us and how. Second, it's important to find people that we can talk to openly about these challenges without fear of judgment, because this really helps to build self-confidence. Finally, we need to learn how to advocate for ourselves with those who aren't that close to us, but with whose support we need, like colleagues or leadership at work. By doing all this, we will be able to design and ask for accommodations that will make our private, public, and professional life more manageable. Going back to behaviors, let's talk now about private behaviors. These are the actions we perform when nobody is watching and include like routines, habits, or emotional responses that happen in personal spaces. For ADHD plus individuals, private behaviors often reveal the tension between internal struggles and the effort to manage daily life. For example, procrastinating on important tasks might appear to others as laziness, but in private, it often comes from feeling overwhelmed or facing decision fatigue. Sometimes, our brains are simply too tired to process or take any action. So now, let's consider how being a highly sensitive person affects our private behaviors. Hypersensitivity influences the environment we create for ourselves. For instance, you might find that you arrange your personal space to minimize sensory triggers, whether that's dimming the lights, using noise-canceling headphones, or sticking to certain textures that feel comforting. These adjustments might seem trivial to others, but for us, they are essential to functioning. This also extends to how we engage with our inner world. As highly sensitive people, we often process emotions deeply, which means that we can spend a lot of time replaying interactions, navigating intense feelings, or overanalyzing situations, all in the privacy of our minds. But when it comes to managing my private behaviors, I have found that self-awareness is my strongest tool. I had to accept that certain habits, like avoiding tasks or withdrawing from activities, weren't just quirks I had. They were my brain's way of coping with sensory or emotional overload. Once I acknowledged that, I could experiment with ways to ease that tension. And the ones that made a real difference were, for instance, paying attention to what my body needs, understanding my energy waves, scheduling downtime, and setting up environments that support my needs, among other things. But what truly helped me to see the big picture was realizing how interconnected everything is. Private behaviors don't exist in isolation. They are part of a system. For instance, how I sleep affects how I eat, which affects how I focus, which then influences how I engage with my work and relationships. The realization that these aspects are all woven together helped me shift my approach from just trying to fix isolated issues into nurturing the entire system. That's where developing a balanced health hygiene comes into play. Proper sleep, regular exercise, and balanced nutrition aren't just generic advice. They are game changers for ADHD plus individuals. These foundational habits help regulate our energy, emotions, and focus, allowing our private behaviors to align more closely with who we truly are, rather than being ruled by the chaos of an overwhelmed brain. So let's be clear. It's not about perfection. It is about creating conditions where you can thrive in both private and public spheres. Now, let's talk about public behaviors. These are the actions we take in social or professional settings, often shaped by societal expectations. For people like us, ADHD plus individuals, public behaviors are strongly influenced by masking, which is the act of hiding ADHD traits to appear normal. Masking is a fascinating topic because it stems from a deep human need for connection. We all want to belong. None of us really wants to feel isolated, But the irony here is that while masking is meant to help us connect, it often has the opposite effect. Masking is a tool to fit in, but fitting in is not the same as belonging. In fact, it's the opposite. Belonging is about being accepted for who we truly are, while fitting in often requires us to suppress or hide parts of ourselves to meet external standards. Why do we do this? One possible reason is that many of us grew up in environments where belonging and fitting in were seen as the same thing. In this context, your value as a person was tied to accepting and embracing to the norms of the group. You might have heard things like, "You are part of this family, you belong here, so you must behave like the rest of us." Can you see how the concepts of belonging and fitting in became entangled in this kind of messaging? It is important to note that masking isn't inherently good or bad. It's a coping mechanism, a social tool that we use to navigate different contexts. It can protect us in some situations or harm us in others, depending on how often we rely on it and how deeply it impacts our sense of self. The key nuance here is how big the mask is and how long we feel we must keep it on. There's a big difference between masking at one-off event you didn't want to attend versus masking in a daily job where you have to pretend to be someone else from 9 to 5 from Monday to Friday. The former might leave you exhausted and in need of a day or two for recovering. The latter, however, is the perfect recipe for burnout. Think about how much energy it takes to keep a mask on. Your brain isn't just doing the job at hand, but also working overtime to read the room, anticipate expectations, and adjust your behavior. Masking can lead to burnout because it forces our brains into overdrive. But there is a way out, and it starts understanding the concepts clearly. Fitting in is to masking as belonging is to authenticity. Masking often creates a significant gap between fitting in and genuinely belonging. Fitting in means suppressing parts of yourself to meet external standards, while belonging allows you to show up as your authentic self. Masking is deeply influenced by our values, beliefs, and emotions. For instance, if I value connection, but I believe I am too much, I might suppress certain behaviors just to avoid rejection. I might connect with others, but not fully. However, authenticity, that is expressing yourself honestly and aligning your actions with your core values, is crucial for building up meaningful relationships and reducing the emotional toll of masking. Because when we mask, we are not just concealing behaviors, we're also hiding our hypersensitivity to things like lighting, sounds, textures, temperature, emotions, etc. This happens because some of us, or most of us, are sensitive to sensory stimuli, social dynamics, environments, and even their own internal states. To unmask and share these sensitivities, we need to open up to loved ones or find supportive communities where we can share our experiences and feel understood. That's the key. We need to find spaces where we can feel understood. The need of managing our hypersensitivity and masking doesn't exist in a vacuum. It directly impacts the way our public and private behaviors intersect. The boundary between public and private behaviors is often fluid, especially for us. For example, a private struggle with emotional regulation might lead to masking in public to avoid judgment. Conversely, the energy spent masking in public can influence private behaviors such as withdrawing to recharge or experiencing heightened frustration at home. Understanding this intersection is crucial because it shows how our internal world interacts with external expectations. By recognizing where these behaviors overlap, we can start aligning our actions with our true values, ensuring that both our private and public behaviors support our well-being and authentic self. To wrap up this session, I will invite you to think about the behaviors and patterns you noticed during our conversation. Which habits support you and which might hold you back? As you know, here on this page, you will find exercises to help you reflect on how you interact with the world and start taking small adjustments that align with your values. These steps can pave the way for bigger changes, so take your time and I'll see you in our next session. You are doing great.